Welcome to It's Time, an in-depth look at understanding the importance of succession planning for your automotive business. It's Time is presented by Standard. Now, here's your host, Doug Kaufman.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome back to It's Time, our 6-part series on succession planning, sponsored by Standard. I'm Doug Kaufman. I'm editor of Shop Owner Magazine, and I'm glad you're here with us. Today, we're talking about a subject that's probably one of the most appealing and appalling of topics to a lot of people. We're talking about money. It's a blessing, it's a curse, but financial planning often feels like a burden that maybe can just be put off until tomorrow. Today, I'm happy to welcome someone who will help us gain a better perspective on financial planning and whether or not that attitude is correct. Art Blumenthal is a nationally recognized business broker in the automotive industry with a well-regarded 40-plus years of expertise in dealing with automotive and tire shops, helping businesses like yours prepare their finances for the future and for succession planning. Art, welcome to It's Time.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
As I said, our subject matter is financial planning for smooth succession. And in our last episode, we talked about the importance of having solid legal advice. And when it comes to the legal advice, financial planning is a very necessary part of that. What it takes to prepare your business for the next generation of owners are, in a nutshell, when should shop owners start preparing their finances and focusing on the monetary aspect of succession planning?
Well, I would say that 3 years is a good rule of thumb. Banks and buyers, when they evaluate your business, will typically want to see the last 3 full years and whatever interim statements you have. If you're putting your business on the market in July, they'll want to see how you're doing in January through June. They're very focused on trends. So to some extent, it's what have you done for me lately? So what happened right now in calendar year 2023 is more important than 3 years ago. But they're looking at trends. They'll look at the average over the past 3 years, but I would say what happened in the last 12 months is most important.
Yeah.
But you want to get your books in order and have them look clean. The most important thing is that they're readable to a buyer. You may use account names that mean something to you, but they're not a standard of the industry kind of name. So a buyer who's specifically looking at an automotive business, they're looking at things differently in terms of parts and labor breakdowns, how your payroll is categorized. It's good to have standard terms and things broken down well. So think of it yourself. If you are buying a business and the business, you want to be able to see clearly what the revenue and expenses are.
Sure. Yeah, the last 3 years of this industry have been maybe a little different than the previous 6 years as COVID took over and made operations either more robust or more chaotic or whatever. So when you're called in to help businesses, what do you recommend? How can businesses assess that financial health of their operation in preparation for succession?
Well, typically a broker is going to ask for tax returns and financial statements for that same period of time. And we're going to look at it the way a buyer's going to look at it. They basically want to see what is the cash flow of this business. How much how much money is generated that's available to me. And when I say that, they may run the business a little differently than you. So if you're an absentee owner, that's going to be a little different than if you're semi-absentee or you're the guy behind the counter talking to all of the customers. So, I'm going to look at the tangible numbers. What are the revenues? What are the expenses? Are there what's called add backs? Add backs are expenses that your business has that are not necessarily relevant to the buyer. You may have your daughter on the payroll even though she's not doing a whole lot of work, or you may have personal expenses that you run through the business, which is not ideal, but if they can be documented, they'll usually be added back. Capital improvements that you may have made, depreciation and amortization. If you currently owe money and you're making bank payments, that's a good example. The buyer doesn't inherit your bank payments. They're going to have your own. So what a broker or an appraiser is going to do is take your financials and go through a process that's called recasting, which is just a fancy word for making those adjustments and looking at them from what is relevant to a buyer. What are the buyer's expenses? And sometimes you can have a negative add back. If you own the real estate, for example, and you're charging yourself only $3,000 a month rent, but when you sell the business, you want to get $6,000 a month rent. Well, I have to basically add $3,000 a month to the rent you're paying yourself because you're expecting the buyer to pay more. So that's the process of coming up with what's referred to as seller's discretionary income or seller's discretionary earnings. It's basically this is the earnings that's available to a buyer, and the buyer typically is going to offer a multiple of that. Could be 2 times that, it could be 4 times that, but it depends on the business. And there's obvious intangible factors too. What are your internet reviews like? What kind of brand have you built for the business and your location? What's the growth potential of the business? All of those factors enter into it, but it's still numbers are critical.
Yeah. You mentioned those, the determining the value of the shop, whether it's 2 times, 4 times. That doesn't sound like it's an easy process. And of course, we all think everything we have is so much more valuable than it may be to someone else. Our value and their value is different in many cases. What strategies can be used to really determine the actual valuation of a repair shop?
Well, I think that, if somebody is looking to sell either, in the coming year or 3 years from now, they want to make the business look attractive, both physically and based on the numbers. I mentioned the word brand. Brand is important. I mean, if you're the face of the business, you're the guy behind the counter, and hypothetically your brother is the lead mechanic, and you want to sell that business and you both want to retire, what are you really selling? The buyer's obviously going to be concerned that when you and your brother leave the business, they're left with 2 or 3 techs and nobody who's dealt with all of the customers. So what's critical to a buyer is making sure that those customers keep coming back. A larger business, if the business is doing $1.5 million or $2 million in sales, chances are the owner is not active in the day-to-day operations, and they have a service manager and a service advisor who are dealing with the customers. And that's where your brand comes in, is you have employees. The age of the employees can be important. If you've had a whole lot of turnover and none of your employees have been there more than 2 years, that's not particularly a good sign. If your key employees are 60 years old, the buyer may be worried that those key employees are going to retire. So, kind of the sweet spot is, having employees who are experienced and, middle-aged, or you have a range. Obviously, sometimes you're bringing in interns from a trade school and you have A techs, B techs, and C techs. So those are things that are important. Having your building and your equipment in good condition is important. If your alignment equipment is a Hunter C111 with strings attached from 30 years ago when I had shops, that's probably not a good thing, because just like someone selling a house, the buyer is going to look at how much money do they have to put into it to make it livable. And the buyer of an automotive business is going to do the same thing. If they have to come in and buy a lot of equipment, that's going to affect what they're willing to offer you.
Sure, buy that new Hunter ADAS equipment that is going to let you expand into the next generation, but even keep up with what's going on right now. Sure. And so, how far? You mentioned 3 years for the shop owner to start thinking about the finances. When do you need to start letting your employees know, letting your customers know, letting your community know that there may be changes? Is that a necessary part of this process?
No, that's actually something you don't typically want to do. I mean, in a somewhat ideal situation, the employees find out on the day you sell the business, and you introduce them to the buyer and talk about what a wonderful person or business the buyer is, and how they're not going to rock the boat, and they want you all to stay, and you're valuable, and they won't cut your pay. So generally, it's best to keep it confidential. Certainly, you don't want your customers or your competitors to know that you're selling the business. If you have a key employee who's been very loyal to you for 20 years, you may want to talk a little about that. Sometimes there's an employee who you think may be interested in buying the business, and employees make very good buyers. If you have a manager who's been there for 10 years and they're very responsible and they seem to have a good head on their shoulders, sometimes they make an ideal buyer. Banks love financing businesses to somebody who has the relationship with the customer and a track record of basically running the business, because that's generally what your service manager is doing. But what you don't want to have is all of the employees to know the business is going to be sold in a year or 6 months and they start getting worried because they think their job's on the line and they can potentially, get nervous and jump ship. And that's about the worst thing that can possibly happen, would be to lose some employees but before you're thinking of selling it.
Inside each standard box, you'll find research and development, precision manufacturing, lab testing and validation, on-vehicle testing, technical training and support. What's in your box?
Now, talking about buying the business, let's go back into the, you've got a service manager or a lead technician or someone who you think would be a great next owner of the business, or you have a child or other family member who wants to work into the business. They may not have the money to buy it outright, so obviously they're going to need to do financing. What kind of financing options are available? You mentioned banks are interested and eager to work with the right people. What kind of options are available for successors who may not have immediate capital?
Well, typically it's a bank and it's an SBA guaranteed loan under what's called the 7A program. So it's not government money per se that's financing it, but the government is guaranteeing 75% of the loan, which reduces the risk to the bank. And so, generally the qualifications is the buyer has to have good credit. Generally they're looking for somewhere around a credit score of 680 and up, ideally over 700, not a lot of credit card debt, haven't had a bankruptcy, haven't had a short sale on a house. Those are the basic qualifications. The buyer doesn't have to have a lot of money. In other words, they're not looking at the buyer needing $300,000 as collateral. So, I've had buyers that owned a pickup truck and that's about it. In general, they need to have a down payment. Now, the standard SBA guaranteed loan is a 90% loan, which means the buyer ideally can come up with 10%. So let's say the business is going to sell for $500,000. The buyer typically would need to have at least $50,000 liquid. Now, if that's not in the bank and they own a home, they can get a home equity line of credit. They can borrow it from their parents. Now, the seller can also contribute 5% of that down payment. So if the seller has an employee that they trust and they're comfortable with it, then instead of the buyer coming up with $50,000 in that example, the buyer can come up with just 5% or $25,000. I've seen some cases where the seller can finance the whole 10%, and the bank may still be okay with that. Okay, it's just a matter of, the bank has certain policies, the SBA has certain policies. Now, I just helped the buyer in California buy a business that he was managing for a year, and very, very qualified buyer. And he did have money for a down payment, but the bank wound up lending him quite a bit more than he was paying for the business. So He was paying, I believe, about $800,000 for the business, and he needed money for some new equipment, so they lent him 100% of what it cost for the equipment. They gave him another $75,000 in working capital, and I mean the end result was the loan was over $900,000 for a business that was costing $800,000. So there's somebody has background in helping a buyer get financing. I mean, I deal a lot with Live Oak Bank. They have a group of people who specialize in automotive loans, and they know the business well, and they're eager to make those kind of loans to employees. The other option is seller financing, where the buyer comes up with whatever down payment is negotiated, and the seller basically gets paid back over a 5 or 10 year period of time. So some sellers like that because it enables them to spread their capital gains tax over the period of that financing. The downside is you're taking some risk there. If the buyer's not successful, you may have to take the business back, which is pretty much dreaded by most sellers, or you have to turn around and sell it to somebody else if the buyer defaults. So I frankly don't deal with too many sellers who want to do financing. That tends to happen more when the business isn't profitable enough for the bank to make a loan. That's the biggest issue. And it's gotten worse because interest rates have gone from 5% to like 9.5%. And so because the buyer has a monthly payment that's so much higher, the business has to be more profitable in order to make sure that loan can get repaid. And in cases where the bank won't finance it, the seller basically has no other choice but to finance it.
Yeah. It's in our last episode, we spoke with Karen Schleifer from Schleifer Law here in Ohio, and she explained how the legal issues of setting up the succession plan can vary from state to state to region. Is it the same really on the financial side? Are the rules different, say in California, in Pennsylvania where you are, in Ohio where we are? Are there significant different financial rules that shop owners need to be aware of?
I wouldn't say that's significant. I mean, the process with banks pretty much works the same. Their criteria is not going to be much different from state to state. In a state like California, which tends to be a high tax state, the seller has to figure in they're going to pay more state income tax on a sale. I would say the bigger difference is from a legal standpoint. States vary quite a bit in terms of the closing process and the procedure. On the East Coast, for example, transactions tend to be a lot more lawyer-centric. There are states that lawyers tend to handle the transactions more. On the West Coast, California specifically, buying a business is more similar to buying a house. It's actually pretty easy. The brokers in California have a standard form agreement that's similar to, a house agreement. And we fill out the form, and the escrow companies handle the transactions. And in most cases, lawyers are not involved very much other than an advisory capacity. Unless it's a real large deal. If it's a $3 million sale, they may be more involved. But your typical, let's say, 500,000 to $1 million transaction is done with standard form contracts and escrow companies who do all the searches to make sure that taxes are paid. They're going to check and verify that the sales tax is up to date, the payroll taxes are up to date. Some states will have a sales tax on the equipment portion of the sale. Some states won't. But I would say it's more the legal aspects, and the process of doing it varies state to state more than how the business is valued. I mean, to some extent, it's supply and demand. And California, for example, in the metro areas, there's a lot more buyers than sellers, and the businesses tend to sell a little more at a premium. I would find in New England, when you get up to cold climates and rural areas, there just aren't a lot of buyers. Businesses won't sell for as much. So, the region of the country will sometimes make a business more valuable. Areas that have a lot of what I would, refer to as ethnic buyers. A lot of the different, demographic constituencies just have a cultural view of owning a business. And, so you'll see certain population groups where people want to own businesses. In other areas, the younger generation, the millennials, are risk averse, and they're not very apt to want to risk everything to buy a business. They'd rather just have a cushiony job.
Right. Work for someone than have someone work for them. It could be a frightening thing. Sure. Either way, it sounds like no matter where you are, you need a solid team to help make sure that you're not doing it yourself, that you're following the proper steps.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's. I occasionally will get sellers who just want to pick my brain and then think they're going to sell it themselves. And, I kind of liken that to me replacing the air conditioning system on my car. I haven't done it before. And yeah, I can look at a few YouTube videos, but chances are the air conditioner is not going to work. So, for most business owners, this is the biggest or one of the biggest assets they have. And if they're retiring, they don't want to leave money on the table. You want to make sure that they get every dollar they possibly can, and they don't get sued. I mean, right. If a seller makes a mistake and he doesn't represent something properly about the business, and the buyer fails and he owes the bank $500,000, and his brother's a lawyer, you better believe that buyer may make a claim. Your books. You gave me books and records that weren't correct. You didn't disclose that there were environmental problems. I mean, there's a host of mistakes that a seller can make if this is the first time and the only time they've sold a business.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. How can those financial risks be mitigated during the succession planning process?
Well, obviously, you want professionals that are doing all of your financials, that are getting into a buyer's hands, and the bank is going to review. One of the main things for the sellers, don't take your foot off the gas. Don't think just because you're selling your business, you can, take off and start playing golf. You have to wait until you're out, because the worst thing you can possibly do is put your business on the market and then have your sales go down. Nothing's going to scare away a buyer more than that. The bank wants to see financials right up through when you sell it. Your financials have to be like 60 to 90 days up to date. And so when you put the business on the market and your sales start suffering, that's about the worst thing that can happen to you. You can't make the place more disorganized by not, attending to housekeeping, keeping your inventory up to date. If you can, return old inventory that's not selling. Don't stop advertising if you've been advertising regularly. So it's important to keep running the business like you plan on being there for the next 10 years. Now, that doesn't mean go out and spend a ton of money on equipment if it's not going to increase the value of the business. But I would say that's the biggest risk, is just checking out mentally. You want to have an idea of what it is you're going to do after you sell the business, because I run into some sellers who, they have a bad day, a car falls off the lift or some other crisis, and it's like, I'm going to sell the business, and then all of a sudden they're not sure, A, what they're going to do, or B, they're going to have enough money, or whatever the reason is. So the emotional state of the seller is pretty important.
Yeah. There's a reason the word planning is in succession planning, right?
When the OE part fails, count on the brand with world-class engineering, precision manufacturing, and more than 100 years of experience. When OE fails, trust Standard. What's in your box?
Art Blumenthal, what resources would you recommend other than YouTube and all those great internet sites that are out there full of genius ideas? What real resources are there that you would recommend shop owners utilize to ensure that they're in peak financial condition?
Well, I would, there's various training groups out there that, I run into quite a bit, networking groups. Some accountants do a lot of work with automotive owners, so they're able to see how a shop owner's financials stack up against, industry standards. So, that's certainly something to look at, is, how your financials measure up, your cost of goods, your labor rates, your payroll breakdowns, the type of benefits that you're paying. Those are the things, the key metrics of the industry. I mean, anything you can do to improve the bottom line is helpful. Maybe you have an employee who's been there for a while, but they're not very important to the business. They're a cleanup guy, or they drive customers sometimes. Look at your business. I'm seeing more businesses that decided it's more economical to use Uber or Lyft to take people home than to have either a shuttle and a shuttle driver, or loaner cars, for example. I see pros and cons to the economics of whether loaner cars are available. Take a look at the advertising that you're doing and whether it's been effective. Just because you've been doing it for 3 years, try to get some measurement as to how effective that advertising has been for you. If you think of it that you may get 3 times your earnings on a sale price, every dollar that you're spending that you don't need to be spending might get you $3 when you sell. And talk to your accountant about your plans. Keep in mind that your accountant's job is minimizing taxes for you. And your job is having the most profitable looking books. So you have to have a conversation with your accountant and kind of balance that out. Sometimes I see accountants play games with inventory levels. They all of a sudden you look like you're making a lot of money, and so they adjust your inventory down to lower to increase your cost of goods. And so, yes, you pay less taxes, but then you have to explain to a buyer, oh, I really make a lot more money, but my accountant, did some things to lower my taxes. I mean, that doesn't hold water.
Right.
The buyer's not going to believe it, and I guarantee you the bank won't believe it. The bank's going to just go by what's on your tax return.
Your website has a lot of solid background information and guidance for people. Point our listeners to that.
Website is art-blumenthal, art-blumenthal.com. And check it out. There is, as you say, some good resources on there, and talk to your accountant, talk to some bankers you may know, or I can certainly provide other contacts for you, and really I always happy to consult with sellers on a initial no charge basis if they just want to chat for a half hour about their business or send me their financials, and I can potentially give them some help. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to talk to somebody and take a look at their business, and 5 years later I hear from them it's time to sell, and that's just part of what most brokers will do for you.
Fantastic. Art Blumenthal, thanks for joining me today.
Sure thing. I appreciate being here.
Throughout this series, we're addressing different topics in the process of succession planning to help your business continue to be a benefit to your community and your employees, even if you're no longer part of it. Thanks to Standard for sponsoring our discussion. Thanks to all of you for joining us. If you've missed any of our episodes, you can check them out at shopownermag.com. Take care, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks for watching. For more information on succession planning, visit shopownermag.com. There, you'll find resources and links designed to help guide you on the road ahead. Learn more about our sponsor, Standard, by visiting standardbrand.com.